Ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the media, it's a great privilege to be here, and it's very special for me to be able to share this podium for a short while with the Executive Director of UN Women, Under Secretary General Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who is, as was said, is a strong and passionate promoter of the equality of women and men, and of the empowerment of women in the world of work, and that's why we feel privileged to have her today joining us in this high-level panel on women's empowerment in the world of work, where she's going to be joined later today by representatives from the private sector. You know that we will have Mrs. Simona Scarpaleggia, the CEO of IKEA Switzerland, Mrs. Muriel Lienau, CEO of Nestle Switzerland, and Mary Ellen Iskandarian, the President and CEO of Women World Banking. So a very interesting panel to touch an issue that is absolutely crucial. We are just not using the potential that this world has to address some of the big challenges that we are facing. These challenges have been outlined in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and we have in the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, we have adopted last year a strategy to mainstream the gender equality and empowerment of women in our work. But in the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, for the last 10 years, this has been a very important objective, and we've actually got first studies that tell us how effective we've been over the past 10 years. So we have some good news to tell you, like that we have about 30% of our projects that directly aim at the empowerment of women, but there's also much more that we could do. And that means mainstreaming the empowerment of women in a much more systematic way. We need to monitor who the beneficiaries of our projects are. We need to make sure that our data is disaggregated sufficiently so that we actually know what we are doing. And I'm sure, and in the panel this afternoon, you'll be hearing, I'm sure that in the private sector, some of the same tools and some of the same instruments could be used for much benefit. But having said that, I don't want to take more time, and I want to just give you the floor, dear Phumzile, to speak to us and to enlighten us as well on this important subject.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas, for that introduction, and for sort of giving the framework of what we are hoping to discuss today. The subject and the focus is women's economic empowerment. Money in the pockets of women is a good thing for humanity, because it always, when women benefit economically, there's a high rate of return for society, because women always use their economic well-being to invest in communities, to make their families better, to be healthier, to make education accessible to more members of the family. So there's a really big benefit in women's economic empowerment. Most of the women who work in the home in the world because they do unpaid care work. The majority of women who work in the home are actually unpaid. That is why the issue of unpaid care has become so important. It's even one of the focus areas in Goal 5. Then the other large number of women who work outside the home in most countries work in the informal sector. In sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, more than 70% of women are in the informal sector. Therefore, it requires us to have the policies to make the informal sector work for women, because these are the women that are the buffer between collapsing into poverty in nations and keeping poverties afloat. They are the ones who put bread on the table. So it is important to look after them and to make sure that when they retire, they are not the poorest of the poor. In countries that are relatively well off, like Switzerland, if they work in the home, we also need to make sure that there's social protection for them so that in their old age, they are not poor because they've looked after everybody. So women who work in the home, informally, are important people for our economy to look after and to recognize. Then women who work in the formal sector. These are the ones that are in structured institutions with HR, with legal department, and guess what? They are not paid equally. They only are paid for 77% of the work that they do. So our intervention as UN Women, it is about making sure that these women are actually paid equally for the work of equal value. The other concern we have, and of course this is one area where we partner with Switzerland in order to make sure, not just in Switzerland, but that the work that Switzerland is doing on pushing for equal pay in the public service, which they are taking also to the private sector, is also relevant work for other countries who are struggling with similar things. Women also who are economically active around the world are in the bottom of any industry. The majority of them, they are in jobs where there isn't a minimum wage. So our work with ILO on social protection is also about making sure that these women have medical care, that they are not the first one to be thrown out whenever there are austerities and the economy is changing, and they therefore become the poorest of the poor. These are also the women who really need childcare that is affordable and accessible so that they can sustain their working conditions. Otherwise, they easily lose the work. So with this scenario about the world of work for women, our collaboration with Switzerland is a lot about macroeconomics, because all of these things I'm touching are reflected in the structure of the way the economies are shaped and work. We are trying to influence with the World Bank, with the IMF, with ministers of finance. Even though I'm responsible for women, I actually in countries work with ministers of finance, with ministers of justice, with heads of states where I can, because these are macro issues that we must change. We also are concerned about women in the poorest countries, and in that regard, in partnership with Switzerland, we also work actively in support women in rural areas. So women who are in agriculture, who would be the poorest of the poor, who till the land, don't own the land, and are the hungriest in the world, even though they are the ones who feed most of us. We work with Switzerland to address the issues in those countries. We change the laws to make the land ownership possible for the women, and of course we also mobilize to support them so that they can become farmers that are paid. So everything is connected. Women are everywhere, and all economies need women. Thank you.
Thank you.